nice lunches that digest them pretty well?
Yeah.
Is it pretty good lunch as always?
Yeah. No.
Does anyone still have any blood flowing into their bum? Can you feel your feet? If anyone wants to stretch, let's stand up and stretch and do this, because what I'm going to do is we're going to kind of go on and chat back and forth. If you want to stand up, let's do it now.
Drink some blood into
It's 1:15.
Oh, man.
1:14 to be exact. Well, that's wrong. You have to go? Doesn't Tom take you home?
That was inspiring. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone for coming, because my usual chat is very much the same thing. It's always the same topic, what's new. So like saying, why do you keep asking what the time is? Every time we discuss it, it keeps changing. Every time we come up with a topic of what's new, it keeps changing. Just what I started doing a couple of days ago is just looking and seeing what's new in some of the journals, what's new in the LA Times, and just asking folks that I run into anything from cardiac rehab to my office. What do you think? What's up? Any particular questions? A couple of items. Diets, there is nothing new. There is no magic diet that's going to make anyone skinny. There is no magic diet that we don't already know about that's going to make us live one day longer. Isn't that disappointing? Is that stuff really fried on the
You want my
thing
hearing
that I
aids?
saw when I came in? I like that. I left a stack of my cards right on the phone. Is there anything magic or new in medicines? Well, yeah, there is, and no, there isn't. Have there been any great recalls? No, not really. What we've all been hoping for is that there's a magic medicine that will make everyone thin and skinny. One of the French companies had this neat drug called rimonabant. You can get it anywhere in Britain and Canada, and they recalled it. And it's kind of a shame in a way, because when you take the average person, they would lose about 15 pounds. They'd spend about $5 a day for the pill, and it make people anxious and crazy. The very interesting thing is it would block cannabinoid receptors. I went to school at Cal in the Berkeley era in the 60s, and a lot of my friends were very interested in cannabinoids, the kind that were green, they would smoke. And many of the people who would have these green things and smoke them would want to eat and get very large. And the chemical companies thought, gee, if we could block that, we would sit down and we would block people's appetites and make them thin and anxious and depressed. So the name of the stuff is rimonabant. You're never going to hear it again. Yell louder. Sounds good. Is this really any better? Well, I can do this better than yell louder, so let's try it. So at any rate, there is no magic pill for getting skinny. There is no magic diet for getting skinny. So we better come here and enjoy. One of my patients pointed out again a very simple thing. There is a certain selective good thing for carrying about 5 or 10 extra pounds. If there's a famine, the people with the 5 or 10 extra pounds will be alive at the end of the famine. Probably many of us here came from ancestors who had to survive 5 or 6 or more days of not eating. Famines, sometimes bigger than that. So for those of us like me who are famine resistant, it's genetic. You can't help it. You better enjoy it and embrace it. There are some new medicines that are out that are very interesting, and all times we get a new medicine, there's always just a little word of caution. They will be coming out with a medicine that is effective for many people who have arrhythmias, notably atrial fibrillation. Most of us who are adults who are grown up or we're about Medicare vintage, if we have atrial fibrillation, we're on a medicine called warfarin or Coumadin. I can look around and I see a couple of folks who are on Coumadin right now because they're sitting comfortably in their chair because they still have a little bit of dollars in their wallet. Coumadin is affordable. It's, the patent is worn off of it pretty well. The new medicine, it's going to be a direct blocker of one of these things. It's called Zalmoterol. Ramon Vitt's going to come up with a whole lot of new names. And it's going to be released for about $6 a pill. You need to take 2 a day because it's brand new. Welcome to American pharmaceutical life. There is another new medicine out. It's a improved version of antiarrhythmics. It's called Multac or Dronedarone. It replaces a lot of the more toxic medicines. It's out, and guess what it costs per pill twice a day? $6. So I was doing the math. What does a tank of gas cost these days?
$2.95.
Tank of gas, $50, $60. Yeah. Because that is kind of my new criteria for what does a new treatment or a new medicine cost. How many tanks of gas per month? At any rate, it's just a little bit of a philosophic thing. We've got new medicines to treat old maladies, and the price tag is pretty high. That's one of the reasons that we're going to go broke and stay broke. My pitch for and against the American pharmaceutical industry is we do have a lot of new medicines. Most of us, if we didn't have new medicines, would not be feeling as well as we are today, probably wouldn't be here today. But there is no free pill. That's just how it is. So you look around healthcare reform, think about it for a while. I'm going to tell a few Canadian stories again in just a moment. There is no free treatment. We're just going to have to sit back, write to our folks and say, please, I hope you're not getting too much money for the pharmaceutical industries to decide what you're going to do with our healthcare. Please think of us, the patients. Please keep our interests aboard. Why do I mention Canadian stories? We came here, and when is the last time anyone said to us, let's go out and have Canadian food for lunch? Seriously, is there a Canadian restaurant in town?
No.
Let's go out and try moose lips and little beaver tail souffle and all of this. I can't think of it. As an old Canuck, I'm taking my wife back to the Great White North next week. As a matter of fact, we all hear things from our women in our life, our moms, our wives, our daughters. That's what we guys are famous for. With any luck, we listen. When is the last time you heard this one? You've never taken me mushing. I never get to go dog sledding. So we personally are going to take care of that little minor oversight. And I hope the next time we meet, you're not telling me how nice it is that all of those little tooth holes are filling in. It's either going to be an adventure or a folly. So I'm going to sit down and go over just a couple of more things and listen for questions and insights. 2 things came up this week. I showed Carol an article. Someone had blood tested King Tut, and they went around and they looked at his parents and his grandparents and everything else to look at lineage and everything else. His grandparents really were brothers and sisters. The Egyptians really did that, and he really has been dead for about 3,500 years. If you were a pharaoh in Egypt and you made it much beyond 50, you were outliving your longevity. These were people that didn't really have very sturdy genes and the like. That was one interesting item. The other interesting item, where they're looking at kids and folks for organ transplants, about 4% of them don't have quite the parentage that they thought. There is a whole lot of us who may not exactly have the parents that we thought we did. There's a whole lot of little surprises that come in. So when we start testing our genes, we want to be sure, do we really want to hear everything that is in there? That was the other little surprise that came up. The next surprise that came up was on Monday, LA Times. Did you read the health section in the LA Times? Yeah. Did you find anything helpful or enlightening in there? This was very interesting. There were 4 different articles on cell phones. Do they make us sick or not? One of my patients is an electrical engineer, which means he's a lot smarter than I am and has a lot more time to think about this. He came in and we spent an exquisite half hour going over what cell phones were doing and getting reports in Wi-Fi stations. Has anyone ever thought that a cell phone might make them sick? Not until I brought it up along the line. I find cell phones can make me very sick when they go off in a car and I'm driving. I have this deep urge to want to pick it up and answer it. The first thing I do is I try to put it on hands-free mode or the like. But cell phones, they're very nice. They emit a small amount of radio waves, things that probably don't congeal our blood, things that probably don't create clots, probably don't create brain cancers. But it raises just kind of the question. We've created a brave new world. I was at a family dinner. I have 10 grandkids. I'm very, very blessed. We're chatting, and I realized that the boys from one end of the table, they're kind of making eye contact, they're kind of there, and they're really not there. They're either adjusting their Nikes, they have ants in their britches, or they're texting each other. They were texting each other. So my comment is, why are you doing this? You told us not to yell at opposite ends of the table. And maybe that's a good thing. I kind of found that to be reassuring, just a little bit. Just a little bit. Yeah. What happened to Bill Clinton 2 weeks ago? He had studs.
Right.
What happened to Dick Cheney and his heart about 8 or 10 years ago?
Should have a heart attack.
And a defibrillator put in. So sometimes our politicians, they do us favors by having things. They make us a little bit aware of stuff. The story is, yes, Dick Cheney does have a heart. That's one of them. Whatever someone of some political stripe thought. Mr. Clinton has served a very, very good purpose of just reminding us that when you have a bad diet, you have a multi-vessel bypass, you're medically treated, you probably aren't cured. You still are going to have further things, and we still need to probably stay active and not have 4 cheeseburgers a day and expect good things happen to us. The first time I ever heard a person's name with a disease was Lou Gehrig's disease. No one, including me, can pronounce amyotrophic lateral sclerosis without having to swallow spit and hope that I said it. And sometimes to have public people, like politicians, have their names put on with a illness is a pretty big thing. For all of us in this room, I hope that they never, ever, ever find, I hope that they never, do cell phones ever make you sick? It's my broker.
It's what? What do you say? I don't know.
And hopefully none of us will ever have a ailment that we get named after us. I think that's my blessing for the day. Okay, a couple of questions that we got, which are interesting so far. Why don't veins, the blood vessels that come back to the heart, clot up like arteries, the blood vessels that lead out of the heart and to the body? Pretty good question. Well, they do sometimes. Sometimes we get clots, we get DVT, deep vein thrombosis. Sometimes if we're really unlucky, we get clots from that go up to the lungs, we get pulmonary emboli. But generally, we don't get arteriosclerosis. We don't get hardening in the arteries and in the veins. The arteries have to do the heavy lifting. The blood pressure, the flow, and everything is much higher in arteries. The walls, in turn, are much thicker. The veins look a lot less like fast-flowing tributaries that have rapids in them. They flow much slower. They're kind of the old man river of blood vessels. They just don't get arteriosclerosis by and large. And that was pretty much an excellent question. That's why when people come in and they get stents, we give them aspirin, we give them Plavix. That's why clots that form in veins, they get warfarin and the like. Just different vessels, different designs. Another question that came up is, how do we diagnose? How do we find that people are getting blocked arteries in the neck, in the abdomen, in the legs? By and large, we do a lot of imaging, a lot of testing. It usually doesn't involve a lot of radiation. If someone thinks we might be getting that as a problem, we usually use ultrasound. We use the same sort of equipment that we're looking to see if expectant moms are going to have boys, girls, twins, 8 at a time or whatever. We miniaturize it for the small vessels, and we get some pretty good pictures from that. It's under your watch, I believe, in there. You got loads and loads of those. If you think you might need an exam of your vessels, Mike will tell you a little bit more about that afterwards. All right, some questions. And I think we better give out some gifts while we're chatting here. Does anyone remember, speaking of Canadian things, Sergeant Preston? Okay. He worked out of an area in Canada called a province. Which one was it?
Yukon.
Yukon. Okay. Gift to the Yukon lady over there. Raise your hand. There. Okay. Oh yes, we're going to do scratches. He had a sidekick. What was Sergeant Preston Yukon's sidekick? Dog named King. Okay. That's one of the reasons that we don't eat at Canadian restaurants. That's not a very exciting question, but I thought it was pretty good. Since we were going back to the Yukon, my wife was asking me these questions, and I just thought, I bet no one really knows that. We've got a pretty savvy audience here. All right. The Canadians gave up on dollar bills a while ago. It's been replaced by something else. What is it?
Coin.
It's a coin. What's the name of the Canadian coin?
A loonie.
A loonie. Who was the first person who said loonie? Back there.
Yeah,
The Canadians do not use Fahrenheit. They use centigrade.
Carol, she got it.
It gets very,
I got
very
it too, but
cold.
it's okay.
It's below zero. There is some point where the temperature is exactly the same. It's below zero, both Fahrenheit and centigrade. Are there any engineers who might know at what point the two temperatures cross below zero? 25. Below 25.
100.
Below 30. Below 5. Lower.
Zero.
Minus 40. Minus 40 below zero. Is the same in Fahrenheit and the same in centigrade. That was the temperature in the night temperature in Whitehorse, the Yukon, 2 nights ago. There we have it. You want to keep breathing and keep moving. All right. Now, the final thing that came out that I thought was nifty from the New England Journal of Medicine, in fact, today's issue that just got released, salt shakers. Are there salt shakers on our table? Yeah. Okay, here's a fascinating statistic. They had someone actually who did the math. We've already figured the cigarettes probably are really not good for us, that shortens life, wrecks their health, and everything else. We've got to come up with something next. How about salt? If we can cut back 3 grams of salt out of the American diet, which has about 15 grams in it, here's how to save a lot of money. Strokes will go down by 1/3. That'll be, 60,000 strokes less per year. Heart attacks goes down by about a similar amount. And they figure that that's probably going to save us about $10 to $24 billion a year. So salt is next. One of the things that they came up with a number of years ago, and it works kind of well, kind of not so well, is cutting back the salt that is in baby formula. Let's see, Gerber's and Beech Nut, are those the 2 big ones I think? They used to salt them up pretty well because who would buy the baby formula? Wow. You do this, and it doesn't taste very well, what are you going to do? You're going to buy the other brand, or salted. And that probably is where a lot of the elevated blood pressure came from, and a lot of kids of my generation and my kids' generation, from having relatively higher salt in that. And it also is probably where a lot of our just kind of cultural or personal need for a lot of salt came from. So I mentioned that. I suspect it's going to be on the evening news tonight and tomorrow, and we heard it first and we heard it here. Now, believe it or not, that's pretty much what really is hot in news. It really has been kind of a slow news year. There haven't been huge product recalls. There hasn't been anything remarkably greater gram that has come up. So having said all that, let's throw it out. I bet you've got many more questions than I was able to come up with in the talk.
With restricting salt, this back to, I guess, chemistry or like, all that class. But didn't they add iodine to salt because there was a deficiency in the diet?
The question is adding iodized salt. Yep. If we don't have iodized salt, and particularly if we grow up in the Midwest and the goiter belt, we need iodine to keep our thyroid healthy, just a little bit, a small amount. And by and large, you get iodized salt. You look around at some of the preparations, some of the sea salts, some of the boutique salts, some of the kosher salts. It's nice seeing you. So we do need a little bit of iodine. I suspect you could probably go to a number of other places and get your salt if you're on an absolute salt-free diet. I honestly haven't seen iodine pills or preparations, but I imagine we could. To be on a totally salt-free diet is virtually impossible. I bet most of us read the labels on things that we buy, and somewhere along the line, what is the most common ingredient along the top of it? Salt. There are salt sneakers everywhere, sneaking in sodium. That's just how it's done. Okay, question. How many grams of salt in the average American diet? 15. 15 grams of salt a day. If we cut back on salt by how many grams do we improve our health? 3. Give the man a gift. You had a question?
Yes, I have some relatives who are sold on the salt substitutes, but I've heard not so good things about those. What is your opinion?
Salt substitutes. There is probably nothing that really, truly substitutes for our palate for salt. Some are better than others. Some of them actually have salts, potassium salts, which may not be good if our kidneys aren't working 100%. Calcium salts, which may not be too good if we're taking medicines that get malabsorbed with that. So when we do take salt substitutes, we want to look at them carefully and see if they might be good for us. I generally tell people if there's a question of it, please run it by your doctor and just be sure that it's pretty good. I used to send people to Mrs. Gooch's to get Mrs. Dash's. And I really wish that it wasn't Whole Foods, because I don't know why. That really sounded pretty good at the time. I amuse easily, but that seemed pretty good. There's probably about 8 different kinds of Mrs. Dashes from Mrs. Gooch's and everywhere else. And they all have different things. I do not have a salt shaker in my house. I have little packets of it for people that really need it. My blood pressure's been up for the last 30 years, as it is with everyone in my family, and I think I've got about 6 or 8 kinds of Mrs. Gooch's and some various vinegars along the line. You can get a number of spiced vinegars. You can get garlic powder. Please don't make it garlic salt. There's plenty of sodium in garlic salt. You can get along just fine on a much lower salt diet. Save the government a whole lot of money not treating your heart failure, your heart attack, and your stroke. So another question somewhere over here. Yes?
What you do, you take your salt shaker, you cover half of it with spice cake, and there's only salt coming out of the little pot.
Tape up half of it for... You're a lady with sensibilities. We guys will sit down and do this until somewhere we see a snowstorm on top of our heads. We'll do it because we're guys. But I like the idea. What a lot of the restaurants will do in places where there's higher humidity, they'll put little rice kernels and thing in there to keep it from caking. I guess if we're in a high humidity area, just don't do that unless we'll come out.
What about the sea salt?
What about the sea salt? The sea salt has extra things in it other than just sodium chloride. It has magnesium and copper and gold and bird poop and all sorts of things that comes in out of the sea that gives it kind of nifty flavors. And, that's an appealing thought, isn't it? And periodically we ended up with various little gifts of things. Somewhere along the line we ended up with some kind of a lavender salt that came with lavender trees going over some pond where it came in. It was really kind of interesting. It was kind of purple, and I really never knew quite what they did with it. I thought that was very interesting. It makes me glad I don't use a lot of salt. But there probably isn't any great benefit in sea salt in there. There won't be enough of the magnesium and the small minerals that are in there, but it has really kind of an interesting texture, and I think if you like something just a little bit out of the different, a little bit on whatever, is kind of interesting. I think it's kind of a variety that changes the variety, but used in moderation. Ask me another question. Mrs. Dash? I don't have stock in Mrs. Dash, no. I think it's really kind of nifty stuff. There is not a lot of extra sodium in Mrs. Dash. And take a look at what is in there. By and large, you'll find there are various herbs and basils and thymes and rosemaries, and I'm not sure what a marjoram is, but I know that they've snuck a couple of those in there from time to time. Yeah.
I have pulmonary arterial hypertension. Does salt affect that at all?
That is a great question. The question is pulmonary arterial hypertension. Probably a fair number of us here have pulmonary arterial hypertension. In a way it will, because one of the consequences of having pulmonary arterial hypertension is the blood is having to work a little harder to negotiate the heart. There's resistance to it going through the lungs. There is a tendency to retain a little bit of extra fluid. When we see it, it comes out as edema. The ankles swell, our hands, our rings fit a little bit tighter. Very often, many people are put on diuretics to try to get rid of the extra salt that is holding on to the extra water with pulmonary arterial hypertension. So that's a long-winded version of, yeah, probably is a good idea not to take a lot of extra salt.
Is there any other treatment for
Treatments for pulmonary arterial hypertension. I hope everyone really, really moved and got the blood circulating in their bum again. I could go on a little bit on this. There is a medicine and a couple of medicines out for erectile dysfunction. They're on my TV all the time. I have grandkids asking if, after 4 hours, why do I need to see a doctor, Grandpa? I've never come up with a good answer for that, but that has been a real question that really has occurred in my house. These medicines, chemically, are all, they're exactly similar. They work in a series of things. They inhibit an enzyme called phosphodiesterase 5. They're PD5 inhibitors. Originally, the Eli Lilly company came up with Viagra. Sildenafil is the trade name of it. And it was originally intended to be used for different things, for just lowering plain old garden variety blood pressure, systolic blood pressure that you find under a cuff. The majority of Americans over the age of 70 do have high blood pressure, more than half. Those are the statistics. And there is a huge market for selling medicines of this sort. The fact that I have probably at any one time 40 or 50 samples of different strengths and different kinds of them means that there is no perfect medicine. And the company thought, gee, this is you're working on a very, very different mechanism. They found that it actually works fairly well. It will lower your blood pressure a bit. It also works for angina, for the chest pains you get when there are narrowed arteries in the heart. And they found that it has a very interesting side effect for which they were able to peddle it for lots of bucks. More than $6 a pill, I understand, the standard dose of a new medicine. It turns out, during the course of this, it is very, very selective and very good for lowering pressure in the right side of the heart. It's very good for pulmonary arterial hypertension. There are several other medicines that are useful for it. Some of them work on prostaglandins. Those are chemical compounds that are commonly found in inflammatory disorders. They have a number of other things. There's a number of other medicines that will work on it directly. There is a very rare condition called primary pulmonary hypertension. That means no one really has the foggiest idea. When we don't know what we're talking about in medicine, we make up words. When you see 3 or 4 or 5 of them together, it means we really don't know what's causing it. Syndrome is good. My favorite word is idiopathic. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or caused by idiots, but people have suggested that. It means we really don't have a clue, but we have to come up with a title. Primary means, well, it's not caused by anything else, we really don't know. So PPH is the acronym. Not that long ago, to have PPH was really bad news. Your life would be very short, and you could expect a lot of symptoms, and the very bad things would happen before some of the medicines, such as the PD-5 inhibitors, before the Viagras, before the prostaglandin inhibitors were out. It is an uncommon condition that affects maybe just a couple of people out of every million. There's probably only a handful, maybe 10,000, 20,000 people in North America with it. There are a lot of us who have secondary pulmonary hypertension. And the exact role of these medicines is still kind of iffy and up for grabs. There are some people who do have direct symptoms because of the high pressure in the right side of the heart and will benefit from these. There are many others who do not. So the original question was about salt and pulmonary hypertension, and we took a nice trip up the river, through the mountains, and all the way back. Here's what I said. If you have pulmonary hypertension and you're holding on to sodium, you really don't want to take any extra sodium in, so it doesn't have to come out. If it is causing difficulties for you, there are medicines, traditional medicines, that came on the market very circuitously, way up the river, around the mountains, and back for us, that may be of help. And I did that with 2 breaths. I saw another question over there. Yes?
What is a heart murmur and does it matter?
What's a heart murmur and what does it matter? A heart murmur is a noise, usually a noise that we hear through a stethoscope. A bruit is kind of the French version of it, as long as you're going to be Canadian, that we hear up in the arteries in the neck. And it means there's turbulent flow. When you look at flow going along through, say, the Mississippi River, you don't hear the Mississippi River. It moves very slowly. You don't see ripples. It's very quiet. When you go up to a creek in the mountains that is coming very steeply down over rocks, or you have rapids, it makes a lot of noise. Sometimes loud enough that you can't hear a conversation over it. That's the difference between laminar flow and turbulent flow. If you're having flow across a structure that's narrowed, it'll make noise, mirrored with a stethoscope. Many of these are very, very innocent. We listen to kids up through high school. 30–40% will have murmurs. You listen to people who are anemic, or their blood count is low. You listen to expectant moms who are pregnant. Almost all of the time you hear a murmur because there is increased velocity, there's increased flow across valves. So sometimes it's very innocent. Sometimes it's a hint that something's up, that a valve is narrow, there's a hole left in the heart that could have or should have closed when we were young and we don't know. For that, we usually order an image very similar to the kind we were talking about, the ultrasound of the arteries in the neck or the abdomen, called an echocardiogram. Much smaller, more miniaturized, and one where we look inside the heart. And by Doppler flow technique, we can see pretty much what is causing the murmur, where it's coming from. And by that, we can kind of infer that it's something innocent that really ought to be ignored, or something that at least ought to be followed and observed a little more closely afterwards. There are books on murmurs, big ones, suitable for prying doors open and inducing a lot of sleep in people. They are big, thick books, and people who can go down deep, stay there a very long time, and hardly ever have to come up for air. Big books on murmurs. I gave you the quick version.
Thank you.
All right. Another question. We've got time for about 2 more here, and I think we need to hawk a couple of more things off here. How about squeezing walls? That was a good question. Okay. What is the French word for a murmur? A murmur. A bruit. A bruit, B-R-U-I-T. When we hear a murmur in the neck, it's a bruit. That was just a test. Okay, French lessons, continue on.
I have a question. I'm supposed to have a arrhythmia, and I get angina also. One doctor said that I might go. Is it dangerous to get a heart attack from that, or he says I might go any minute? That's the way he put it.
Sounds like you sought a professional philosopher here. We're all philosophers. Sometimes the doctors get paid for it. The question was about diagnosis of two common heart conditions, arrhythmias and angina. We have really thick books on arrhythmias. There are many, many kinds of arrhythmias. The most common kind is one of the ones that we talked about, atrial fibrillation. At least as common that or just plain old extrasystoles. And those are the easy ones. They get much, much more involved than that. There is many kinds of arrhythmias as there are sands of grains of sand on a deep beach. We all have our own unique sort of thing. Angina, again, a good Latin word, just means pain. It can be pain coming from the heart, it can be pain coming from the esophagus, it can be pain from being old guys like Michael at 42 right here. If we live long enough, we're all going to get some aches and pains. And as I think all of us know, with every passing year, we've got a moment just to live one more year for one more good pain. That's how we're designed. We best enjoy it. When I hear folks that have angina arrhythmias, those are two of the more common things that we end up treating. And usually we can treat them to the point where we can get along, we can come out and have lunch with our friends and feel pretty well. Until the last day when the hand of the Lord is on our shoulder and we leave the world. If that's what your philosopher was telling you. I am very good at treating angina. Most of us, we doctors are. We're pretty good at treating arrhythmias. We are uniformly miserable at predicting when that last moment of the last breath is going to be. And isn't that a wonderful thing? Yeah. I don't think most of us really want to know when that moment is going to be there. Woody Allen once said in his own humble way, the prospect of dying doesn't bother me. No problem at all. I just really don't want to be there when it happens. So maybe that's what he was saying. Yes?
I was curious to know what atrial fibrillation is what I was diagnosed with, and I felt nothing. And I went to the doctor just for a checkup. This is early on since I've had everything else done, but that was the main alarm. And they took my pulse and became hysterical. And then the doctor, they put me on a machine. There would be an EKG, what I had, tested. And I was going through this huge high pulse, and everyone was running around, and I was searching to feel something, and I felt nothing. And so the doctor said, you can't leave. It was a general practitioner, my anesthesia. You can't leave. And I said, well, what do I do? Can you spend the night here or something? And so I sat on the couch, and he called the pharmacist, and they sent over medicine, topo. And then I was supposed to recognize when this came upon me, and to take that, and I've never recognized anything coming upon me. And they also said that maybe I've had this for a long time, and I've had something for a long time that I don't even need. So it was really dangerous for me because they said, hey, be sure to take a double if you're, and everyone was looking at me like I'm going to explode and go to the roof. And I'm thinking, where's it going? Where's it supposed to be?
My office is very boring by comparison. I think you had an exciting afternoon. I think coming back, the question has to do with atrial fibrillation treatment and why do we feel it, why don't we feel it, and how much, I guess the word is excitement, should it generate. Is it really an e-ticket ride at Disneyland, or is it kind of the teacup ride where we get to sit back. It is the most common rhythm problem that is involved when we get to treat. If we look at 40-year-olds or 42-year-olds, probably about 1 in 20,000 will have it. It's not a very common problem. If you look at healthy 90-year-olds, go to a golf course. That's where healthy 90-year-olds seem to congregate. Probably about 30 or 40% of the healthy 90-year-old golfers will have atrial fibrillation. The rate goes up as we age. As we age, we get wisdom, we get gray hair, and our hearts become stiff, and they don't fill quite as well. And that predisposes us to getting atrial fibrillation if we have the gene. I have found it fascinating. I've been doing this job for a couple of years now, that there is a rotten correlation between having an irregular heartbeat and feeling it. I see many people that have palpitations, and we do these 24 hours EKGs, these Holter monitors, and they have far fewer skip beats. Normally, most of us ought to have a couple hundred skip beats during 24 hours. Every 10 days, we get 1 million heartbeats, for goodness sakes. And, some people, they feel every single one, and it really is irritating to many people. Other people can have half of their heartbeats can be premature, or they can have atrial fibrillation, and they feel just fine. One of my fellows said, gee, some of us are built like chihuahuas and some of us are Rottweilers. We all have different levels of concern. I said, I don't think it's quite that simple. But we do perceive things, we do feel things very, very differently. Sometimes we have things that bother our medical team. They bother our nurses and our physicians and the techs and therapists involved with us a lot more. The reality is with atrial fibrillation, there are really only two big concerns. You can have a clot that forms, that's death, by the way. It's a stroke or a heart attack if the thing makes a U-turn into a heart. And if it's going fast enough, long enough, it can cause us to get breathless because we're retaining fluid. We have heart failure. And that really is about pretty much the situation with atrial fibrillation. But the other thing is that most of us don't like surprises. We don't. Somewhere after our 12th birthday, when we've had a surprise birthday party, there really aren't that many nice surprises left in life. Most of the time, especially if you're in a medical office, the surprise is not a good one. That's how it is. And to walk in with an unexpected arrhythmia, very often you find that calm people are speaking about 1 octave and a couple of decibels higher because they don't like the surprise. Although it's generally innocent, if it's something you just don't encounter on a regular basis, most family practitioners don't. The worst thing you really want to do is ignore a surprise. We ignore surprises at everyone's discomfort. If you suddenly are hearing a clunk in the trunk of your car and you want to drive out to Palm Springs to see the old, I was going to say old dancing ladies. I think that's politically incorrect, the Follies. And you hear a clunk in your trunk, you probably don't want to keep driving. You probably want to see what it is. There's a lot of territory between here and there. If we're someone that shows up in the doctor's office and we suddenly have an irregular heartbeat, you probably want them to show a lot of concern about it and figure it out and find a way to treat it. So
they were very concerned.
good. They were treated with respect. I like that. I trust that they didn't just let it go at that and they followed up. I kind of thought they might have. All right.
Yeah, I have a question. Does your oxygen level have anything to do with this?
Does the oxygen level have anything to do with it?
It gives you both. And I wondered, because mine always seems to be the same. This is 89 for the heart, it's 89 for the heart.
Meters that we have that record things are absolutely fascinating. The biomedical engineers that put these things together are extraordinarily smart folks. They can work on a whole number of platforms, combining physiology with really good electronics, with getting these things to actually read out in the form where we can see them. If you have an irregular heartbeat, like atrial fibrillation, it just absolutely stymies electronics. Because the electronics, they need kind of they need an algorithm. They need kind of a blueprint they can follow. They will sit down and they will average a couple of beats. And if the interval is different on them, you get kind of interesting and strange numbers. So that was one part. The second thing, the question has to do with oxygen concentration in arrhythmias. If our oxygen concentration goes really, really, really low, bad low, very often, in fact, much of the time, we'll get irregularities of the heartbeat. And sometimes that's the least of our problems. It's more of a manifestation of the oxygen being low rather than anything else. And there are some rhythm problems that we really want to pay attention to, the treatment of which is to get that oxygen level back up to the point where everyone's a little happier with it. I hope I answered the question. I came up with an answer. I'm not sure it was the answer to what you're asking.
What's a regular heart?
Yeah. What's an irregular heartbeat? It's about this big, and it's in a book that you can open a door with. And,
Number one,
yeah.
normal.
What is the regular heartbeat? Somewhere generally between about 60 or 100 is pretty much of a normal heartbeat. For many of us, if we're fairly fit and calm, we go to sleep and we go below that. For many of us, if we get a notice from the IRS and we're having a fever or we're pregnant, we're on a foot race, it'll go higher than that. But by and large, about 60 to 100 is pretty much a normal operating rate for most of us that are we got time. The number 2 o'clock came up. I've got 2 things here. One more.
Are you seriously considering that I leave the salt off the rim of my margarita glass?
There are some questions that are far better than any answer anyone can come up with. The question is, are we seriously thinking about leaving the salt off a margarita glass? That is a question that is far better than any answer I'm going to come up with. I'm going to let, there's an old expression in philosophy, the thing is true by the force of its terms. I have no idea what that means either, but that's a good answer. Thank you for coming. I really enjoy these sessions because when you're kind of locked in a small cardiac imaging office, we see folks coming through, just, what's going on? What actually is different in there? We all have our own life experiences. We chat with our friends. We see things in the paper. I get a lot out of this. So thank you very much for inviting me. Looking forward to our chat again.